There we go. All right. So welcome, everyone. This is another webinar on growth mindset. I gave this very webinar in Dutch 2 weeks ago. There were some people there that thought it was in English, didn't understand it, asked me to do it again in English. So here we are to talk about growth mindsets, this time in English. The recording will be available afterwards. You can always reach out for us. And we're going to talk about growth mindset today, how you can make organizations more agile, more adaptive, and more resilient. And my colleagues came up with the title Survival of the Agile because of the continuous change that we now live in kind of forces us to be more agile, forces us to be resilient against complexities. And that is why growth mindset is such a relevant topic today. What I wanted to talk about was growth mindset and how it also extends outside of its original niche to also the brain, the behavior, and also organizations. I want to illustrate that with a case study on how we help one of our clients apply and cultivate a growth mindset in the energy sector, in the energy transition. We'll go over a couple of concrete growth mindset techniques. And there will also be a Q&A to, of course, answer any questions you might have. Shortly about me, my name is Philip Jordanov. I'm a cognitive neuropsychologist. I am fascinated by the relationship of the brain and our behavior, which is what I tend to study. And I also apply that practically at Neuroscience, where I am the head of consulting and training. And I'm responsible for translating scientific insights, frameworks, and models into actionable solutions for our clients in order for them to change behavior, to be more effective leaders, to make better decisions. Quite a lot of topics that have to do with behavioral science and psychology, actually. Shortly about Neuroscience, which kind of embodies what I do as a professional as well. We're an organization that helps improve and change companies with behavioral psychology and neuroscience. And the ability to change and be adaptive, as I said before, becomes increasingly important in a complex world. So that is why we have a very large array of different types of projects and collaborations. We usually consult and implement. Growth mindset is one of our consulting solutions, actually. We do a lot of training and development. And since we are essentially also a bunch of rogue academics, we do a lot of in-house research as well on these new topics. So why growth mindset and why now? Because if you're familiar with growth mindset, or if you've heard it before, maybe is there anyone in the audience or Hillary who have read the book Mindset by Carol Dweck? You can also use the chat, by the way, to interact, or have heard this term before, because it actually is quite an oldie. Growth mindset. It is a concept that was first coined in the 70s and 80s by Carol Dweck, a behavioral or a developmental psychologist. And she found that there are two mindsets, especially she studied children, but it generalized to people as well. Two mindsets that are very distinct and that kind of describe how we deal with challenges, how we deal with efforts. Where a fixed mindset is a very human mindset that just helps us avoid risk, gets out of the way of challenges because they cannot pose a risk to us, and just kind of keeps us in the place where we are, hence the name fixed. And then she found that growth mindset is something where people people embrace challenges, and they start to like change, start to like disruption, and they see it as an opportunity to learn. But this is already a concept that we've known for decades. So why is it so important now? What we see is that the world around us, both societal and business, is just changing so rapidly that you could say that change is the only constant. And there's an incredibly amount of increasing uncertainty and complexity as well, and also volatility and ambiguity. All these terms that they show up a lot more these days, and that has many consequences to which we won't go into today. But what we definitely see is that with all these change and increasing complexity and uncertainty, we have a lot of processes that we can use for it. Like a lot of people are saying, we need to work agile, we need to do scrums. But there was also a mindset change that is required for that. How can we get people to really thrive in change, to not be afraid of what is happening, and to embrace these challenges? And I think that that's why growth mindset is becoming so much more important today, maybe even more important than it ever was, the mindset that we need now. If you look at the impact of growth mindset and the business case behind it, why are all these companies suddenly investing in growth mindsets? We've seen companies like Microsoft, Cigna, and Disney take this very seriously. And an institute in the States that's called the Neuro Leadership Institute has actually researched this quite extensively and saw that the business case behind growth mindset is pretty clear and also quite quantifiable. They see that it's quite clear that when growth mindset is being taken seriously and is embedded into an organization, there is an uplift of engagement, ownership, also in trust, also in risk-taking, innovation. And we're not looking at small uplifts or small increases as well. We see numbers like an engagement that increases with 34%, trust that is being described to have increased by 47%. Innovation by 60. So these are crazy numbers that are also very attractive to business leaders, which is part of the reason why they also take growth mindset so seriously these days, why they tend to invest so much. And if you look at it through the eyes of analytics, you can see that metrics like employee engagement, the emotional intelligence of a team, which are two central metrics when it comes to growth mindset, are impacted by everything that we do when we implement growth mindset, when we increase trust, when we increase commitment, when we try to work on workplace satisfaction and risk-taking culture. So when you see growth mindset research and also business cases, you see that employee engagement is one of the central metrics that people look at. And it's key to monitor that and see that the interventions that you apply to people, to systems, have an impact on that. And when you measure it, you can definitely see a before and an after effect. And ultimately, that all translates into how good people feel at your company, how appreciated your employees feel, and also how functional they are, how willing they are to embrace challenges. And I'm gonna go to the chat. I see a question over here by Henry. Yes. Happy to hear that. And you can always read the book later, but the book is also not a necessity, by the way. You can take the book, use it as a compass, but there are lots of actionable insights that are not described in the book as well, because it's already quite an oldie, quite academic, but it's a good way to start. And I'm happy to see that you're also seeing it happen in the industry as well. All right, so the business case of growth mindset is quite clear, but yet there are many hurdles to it, and there are many, sometimes quite some complexities to it as well that I want to get into. And a good way to do that is to look at some myths, because growth mindset, being an academic construct by nature and now used widely in industry and business as well, there are lots of myths surrounding growth mindset. One of which is that growth mindset is a binary concept, so there's fixed and growth mindset and nothing in between. And usually when you see growth mindset being implemented in an organization, it starts with some type of executive briefing. And then senior leadership is convinced that everyone in their organization is still fixed and needs to get into growth mindset. And this, of course, is understandable, but it doesn't, it's not completely true, because growth mindset is actually, a mindset is a continuum. The way that you look at the world, the principles that you hold and use that influence your behavior and your decisions, they never happen in a binary fashion. It's always a continuum. And if you look at yourself, for example, there could be cases in which you have a growth mindset all the time. Take cooking, for example. Maybe you're a very adventurous cook and you always want to try new recipes and you're not afraid of making mistakes because it's experimenting and learning from it. This is not me, by the way. I'm quite rigid when it comes down to my recipes. And there could be other situations where the same person, you or a colleague or a significant other, has a fixed mindset. Maybe when it comes down to trying new sports, or when it comes down to reading new genres of books, or in business when it comes down to rolling out a new strategy that you're not used to, for example. It could be that where in other areas you are a growth mindset, that you feature more of a fixed mindset. You're scared of the consequences, you're scared of the risks, and that they may outweigh the benefits. You're scared of making mistakes, and that is very human. So the two ends of this growth mindset continuum are good to have a bit of a conceptualization of what growth mindset means, but you should be aware that it's very situational and contextual. And if you look at an organization and its employees, there will never be a day in which everyone will have a growth mindset and a day where everyone will have a fixed mindset. But if you understand the concept and its principles, you can start recognizing when growth mindset is dominant or when fixed mindset is dominant and when you need one or the other. So it's a very fluent continuum, actually, this mindset. It's also a myth that growth mindset is striving for business growth. It's a mistake that is often made, again, by senior leadership, by implementing growth mindset solely with the goal of seeing business growth, seeing the metrics of the KPIs go in the right direction. And the thing is, that actually does happen. Growth mindsets and business growth are quite intrinsically linked, because being able to cultivate growth mindset and a growth mindset culture means that you and your employees or your managers or your leaders are going to perform better. But they are separate from one another, because growth mindset is really aimed at development, is aimed at learning, and not so much as at output and results. But what we see is that business growth is one of the, you could almost call it, side effects of growth mindset that is surfacing upon correct cultivation. So they're very much linked, but they're not the same. Also, one, and this is one that I often encounter when I work with clients that work on growth mindset, is that growth mindset is saying yes to everything, saying yes to more work. We're going to do growth mindset, so now we have to have an open mind and say yes to everything, which is also not true, because growth mindset is actually more about learning, again, learning and developing, and also being critical about, should we say yes to a new strategy, a new project, another colleague, another hire? Is it logical to do that? Is that how we learn optimally? Is that how we get the most out of developing and the most out of continuous learning? And usually it's not. So growth mindset is often more about looking critically at something with an open mind, but also being able to make decisions about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do as a business or professional. So there are many more myths. I can go about this for hours, but I'm not going to do that today. If you want to put growth mindset into the textbooks, and this is also how you see it in the textbooks, you will see it defined as the belief that skills and abilities can be improved, and that what is central to this is development and continuous learning, and not the output that comes out of it. So it's really about what you put into something, what's being learned, and not so much about what is being measured in terms of KPIs and business performance in the organizational setting. So an easier way to describe this is growth mindset is believing that if you're not able to do something, you're not able to do it yet, but you can always learn to do it. It's this central belief of skills and abilities that can be improved. If you look at the most common framework of growth mindset, it's often being broken up into several dimensions, like challenges, effort, mistakes, other people, and feedback, the way you process and use feedback. And what you see is, of course, there's a false binary over here. So it's not really one or the other, but you can use this to kind of navigate between these different sections of growth mindset. And what you see is that growth mindset is about, as I said before, embracing challenges, putting in the effort because you know you're going to learn from it, feeling rewarded as well, as even when you make mistakes, because you know that now you're one step closer to improving a little bit more, step by step. Other people, you see them as valuable sources of feedback that can help you improve and that you can help improve on their turn as well, and you don't feel threatened by them. And then there's feedback that you truly embrace and that you look for and actively ask. That's an ideal painted picture of growth mindsets. And then on the other end, in fixed mindset, of course, we see why would you engage with challenges and put in all that efforts? Because it's all seen as risk. Why not just let things stay the way they are? Me in my position at this company, if I step out of my boundaries, then maybe it will reflect negatively on me. It's very human to have a fixed mindset. And other people might be threatening, right? And feedback could be such a scary thing as well, because often it's not given as eloquently. People can be quite blunt and it might reflect negatively. So both of these mindsets are very human. But what we're looking for is to help an organization and its people gravitate towards growth mindsets in most of the scenarios. Are there any questions so far, by the way? And you can use the chat for that as well. As I see one question. All right, still clear? Then I will keep going. If I need to go a bit faster or slower, don't hesitate in letting me know. So now we move from having this clear concept of what is and what isn't growth mindset and why it's important and what the business case behind it is, to how does it work in organizations. And as I said, growth mindset is being taken very seriously by large market leaders like Disney, like Microsoft, like Cigna. And what you see is that it manifests in many different ways. Some companies really focus on re-evaluating the way in which they score employees, they score performance. So the KPIs, for example, they will completely overthrow the existing systems and really evaluate based on learning, on development, people KPIs instead of business KPIs. Some organizations are really keen on creating what is called a culture of speaking up, or a speak up culture, where everyone's voice is being heard and everyone feels that they have buy-in into processes, which is also intrinsically linked to growth mindset. Some organizations are really they're heavy on the L&D side, and they're going to reallocate resources to invest a lot in upskilling and reskilling stakeholders, which is also could be a prerequisite of growth mindset. Some organizations believe that in order for growth mindset to happen, we need to make everyone a great coach, which is something that I quite agree with. So they invest a lot in facilitating coaching and cross-domain learning, again, in this term of continuous learning again. And if you look at the research and also at the business cases, what becomes very clear is that growth mindset it can be quite an abstract concept, and it manifests differently for each organization. So the only instruction that could be replicated is test and learn what works for your organization. For each organization, this will be different. And before, we talked a lot about these metrics, right? Like employee engagement, like the emotional intelligence of a team, the worker satisfaction. These are all metrics that you can monitor quite closely because it's usually already set up within HR. And you can try and experiment with these growth mindset interventions. And we're going to go over a couple of those in just a bit. And you can literally see what the effect of those interventions is on the metrics that you have to monitor. And I would say that employee engagement is probably the number one metric that you want to be looking out for. So this gives you quite a good ground for experimentation, as long as your organization is also agile in its response to the learnings that come from such an experiment. And we'll talk a bit more about that later as well. So it's different for each organization. And the thing that works is testing and learning. I want to talk a bit about a case study that we've been working on. We've been working with a large energy supplier in the Netherlands, which, as most energy suppliers, is going through the energy transition, which is probably one of the biggest changes that, well, their industry has ever seen, but also that the world might have ever seen. And everyone has something to say about the energy transition. And what became clear to them is that to go through this continuous, almost disruption-like change, all these reorganizations, every process that needs to be updated, every relationship, every stakeholder loop that needs to be readjusted. What is key is that their people have an open mindset in this, and that they can respond to what is happening. And I'm going to answer a question right now about employee engagement. There's a question from the audience. Is it possible some people just prefer fixed and don't want to have a growth mindset and prefer to work in an organization that doesn't have one? That's a really good question. And I would say that there are organizations in which people are really averse to change. So when you look at the kind of more the older legacy organizations, growth mindset is often seen as something that is now welcome there, because everyone is quite happy with the way it's going. In psychology, we call this the status quo bias as well. Why change when we have something going on here? And from my experience as well, sometimes you do encounter these types of organizations or these types of stakeholders within organizations. And then again, the strategy that could be helpful in persuading them that that growth mindset is something that could be very beneficial is by doing these small experiments. So not immediately overthrowing or changing or pivoting the entire organization, but just coming up, and we're going to talk about that later as well, coming up with a couple of simple habits, simple tips, simple techniques that anyone can use and just start experimenting on a small scale, see what happens, and see if it has a positive effect. And if it's not being received well, we'll try something else. So it's a great question, because this definitely happens from time to time. And it also kind of hones in on this phenomenon that we call the intention action gap. That's another archetypal organization where everyone sees the benefits and merits of growth mindset and is really certain that we have to do something with growth mindset, but they're just not doing it. The gap between intention and action is too big. And again, this strategy of starting small with a small experiment, a couple of habits or a couple of changes that reflect growth mindset in just day-to-day things, day-to-day habits, starting small and experimenting with those changes can really help kind of shift the perspective of those stakeholders step by step and convince them that some aspects of growth mindset might actually really be beneficial and should be scaled throughout the organization. So that is something that you definitely see, and that's why it's such a good question, because it can be quite frustrating as well when you have all these different viewpoints about growth mindset on the continuum in the organization. So back to the energy transition. It's clear that something has to change in the way that energy is being supplied, but how are we going to do it? So that is why it's one of the starting points that we started working together with this energy company. And looking at the situation there, what we see is that the market is changing rapidly. So there are exogenous influences, but also endogenous influences, because each and every organization that is in that transition is dealing with constant reorganizations, which means there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fright. People are they're scared that they might lose their job or they have to do something completely else. So the mindset component is very active. And of course, when we look at big energy companies, they want to lead, they want to pose an example and retain their position as market leader as well, and focus on that continuous improvement. So we have all these ingredients that really call for a growth mindset, something that keeps their people and themselves and their organizations agile and adaptive and resilient to everything that is going on. So that was the goal. How can we create the context of an agile, resilient, and adaptive organization? How can we create these conditions so that the client can keep growing? This company that is supplying energy to millions of people can keep growing, developing, and learning. That was the goal. So when you go about something like this, there are a couple of things that you need before you start wildly experimenting, because in the end, you want an entire organization to move with you. So executive buy-in is very much key. We need leadership to be on board because they play a crucial role in actually putting intention into action. Knowledge and clarity about growth mindset. So I'm also a teacher and a trainer, and found that it is very important that there is absolute clarity about what growth mindset entails and what it means. And there needs to be consensus on this in senior leadership and also throughout the organization. So there's a lot of capability building and knowledge transfer as well. You need a lot of engagement. So always the first thing that we do when we engage in cultivating a growth mindset is just talk with as many people as possible. So you have a representative set of stakeholders throughout an organization that can give you the information that you need, give you the needs, the risks, what they expect, what they fear, the impact of the changes. And you want to bring these people in and really co-create the growth mindset. It's not something that you kind of implement and just paste on an organization. It's something that you co-create and experiment and cultivate together. And as I said before, and I keep mentioning this, you need to be able to measure if it's having any positive effects, or maybe it's even backfires. So we need to have these metrics in place, things like employee engagement, things like team EQ, things like worker satisfaction. We need to monitor them step by step and throughout while we're experimenting. When we move on to really implementing or cultivating, I should say, growth mindsets, there is a framework, an evidence-based framework that has been well researched in both academia and in business cases as well, that has been known to help organizations guide through a growth mindset transition. And this framework is called PHS, or Priorities, Habits, Systems. And what is important is that constantly throughout experimenting with growth mindset step by step, You have the right priorities. So again, you have the executive buy-in and you prioritize what needs to happen. Everyone always knows, well, we might need growth mindset and this sounds great. We're going to do this and that, but it needs to be prioritized actively. That's the first ingredient. We need to define what is needed and prioritize it. Then we need to see what embodies those priorities throughout the organization. So what behaviors, what day-to-day things in the way that employees interact with each other, the vocabulary that they use, the way that they give feedback, the way that meetings are conducted. How can we input small changes in those habits so that we can embody and embed those priorities throughout the organization? How can we do the behavioral change part? And then systems. How can we make sure that all this effort that we're putting in prioritizing and changing behavior is actually being supported and reinforced by organizational structures, systems, and processes? So if you have a great idea of having this innovative cross-domain teams come together every 2 weeks and discuss what is needed for growth mindset, which experiments we need to run, which behaviors we need to change, but we also have a very slow and tantalizing bureaucratic approval process that could take, I don't know, 6 months to get one innovative initiative through, then we have a system that is blocking those fruitful habits and priorities to create growth mindset. So we need to make sure that these three components are always aligned, set the right priorities, embody those priorities with the right habits and behaviors, and make sure that those habits and behaviors are reinforced by the systems and processes featured in an organization. And if you keep track of those three elements, then you can quite effectively navigate an organization through a growth mindset transition, really help them experiment and find out what is right for them, what works for them. Are there any questions so far about the framework? Because this is quite a lot of information on the strategic part before we dive into the actual growth mindset techniques. And I'll be monitoring the chat as well. All right. Then I'm going to move on to what can you do on a day-to-day basis. I keep talking about starting small, right, and experimenting. So what are examples of things that you can actually do that you can start doing tomorrow, basically, to kickstart growth mindset in your organization? So this would be about the habits and behavior parts. And I broke up three techniques, one about reflection and feedback, one about vocabulary, and one about dialogue. So the first one is called the growth mindset prime. And this is something that we always encourage organizations to do because it is easy and it's the fundament of many other growth mindset habits. It's about being able to recognize a fixed mindset in a meeting, in a colleague, also in yourself or in a manager, and helping them priming the growth mindset. So helping them kind of shift perspective and look at a situation, a problem, a challenge through a growth mindset glass or growth mindset glasses. And being able to recognize this, so having that mental eureka moment, is this, oh, this is probably a fixed mindset. I see this person saying that. Could that be something fixed mindset? I see this meeting going wrong. Are we having a fixed mindset? And the way in which you can spot this actually is if you hear yourself saying things or hear colleagues saying things like, I just can't do this, or I'm not the kind of person who comes up with these types of strategies or who works on these types of projects. This is a vocabulary that's very fixed mindset related because it just says, I can't do this and I never will. So when you spot something like that, there's quite an easy tactic that you can use to switch, to start pivoting from fixed mindset to growth mindset. And it's not by saying you have a fixed mindset. It is simply by mentioning growth mindset. So this might sound a bit far-fetched, but it works quite well when you look at the data. When you encounter a fixed mindset situation and you have, for example, your L&D department started with growth mindset training, you have had a masterclass in growth mindsets, your manager gave you the book, just mentioning like, hey, isn't this a situation where we could apply growth mindset? Or is this a situation where growth mindset could be handy? Or hey, we heard about growth mindset this other day in the masterclass. Shall we put that to use here? And by simply priming that, because we're talking about mindset is very pliable. By simply priming that idea of growth mindset, of it being there, it being active in people's conscious, it helps people trigger the growth mindset habits that are needed. So it helps people see like, oh yeah, well, I am not the type of person that usually does this, but I mean, we've been talking about growth mindset. Let's just try it. What the heck? Let's just do it. And this, of course, this doesn't work with everyone, but this is a simple habit that if you can do this at work every day, if you recognize it in yourself, maybe once a day, maybe once a week, could also be. If you make this a habit, it takes growth mindset and it puts it to the forefront of almost the collective consciousness of people at an organization. People keep thinking about it. Oh, this could be growth mindset could be really great here. Or is this a fixed mindset thing? So by giving people almost the mental vocabulary, the mental tools to to identify fixed mindset and growth mindset, and to kind of playfully shift between those two. Of course, not everyone is going to shift from fixed to growth or growth to fixed immediately. That's not how it works. But for people to have the continuum active in their mind is an amazing first step. It really helps people to be able to talk about growth mindset as well. So it's a really simple habit that you can prompt everyone to do once a week, twice a week, once or twice a day, even better. And the second one really hones in on vocabulary. This is the second technique. And this one is incredibly practical. This is something that you can immediately start doing. I do it all the time. And I also prompt the people around me to do it. And especially when I work on a growth mindset transformation, this is one of the habits that we always recommend. You can go from fixed to growth mindset in one word. Managers can prompt their managees to do this in meetings. You can tell this to yourself. You can tell this to your people. When you hear something or when you say something like, I don't understand this, I cannot do this, or I'm not good at this, add the word yet. Sounds like a very small, maybe insignificant thing, but it can have a huge effect. I don't understand this yet. I can do this yet, or I'm not good at this yet, really implies the need for learning, the need for improvement, the need for agility on that front. And it also invites other people to think about what you said very differently. If you said, I can't do this yet, it prompts maybe your manager, maybe your teammates, maybe your VP to think, okay, this person cannot do this yet, but what can we give them? What context do they need to be offered or work in so that they can do this? So if this word yet becomes part of the daily vocabulary of an organization, it becomes so much easier to start helping people, to give feedback, to offer perspective, to offer training, to offer more tools, because you are inviting it in. Instead of saying, can you give me some feedback, which is very generic, also a good thing, by the way, you can use that word yet when you run into a challenge and see the changes, see what it does to dialogue, see what it does to discussion, see what it does to conflict as well. Simple experiment, but can have a lot of effect. The third technique is about growth mindset meetings. How can you bring growth mindset into a meeting on a more systemic level? And there are 3 tips that we always offer as well, and are very easy to implement on the habit level. The first one is to start each meeting by identifying a shared goal. So when we have a meeting, especially when it's cross-departmental and we have a lot of stakeholders, they're usually mentally they're in different meetings. They all want to do different things. They have different goals, they have different visions. But if we start and we prompt everyone, if this is on the agenda, by setting one shared goal, it primes people's mindsets to take the perspective of others in the meeting as well, to think along, to be more empathic, to be more compassionate, to be more constructive. So it's a simple thing, and it could be a small goal, it could be a small thing, but it really helps, again, to shift that mindset, shift it a bit on the continuum from fixed to growth. Also, when we talk about giving feedback, inviting in perspectives, running good dialogue, it's a great idea to separate, to decide, and to discuss on a meeting agenda. Because if that separation is not made, it could mean 2 things. It could mean that everyone is kind of running through the agenda and the most senior person in the meeting is making all the decisions. Or it could mean that there is endless debate and discussion on things that should just be decided upon and that might not need so much debate or discussion. And by making the distinction, it could literally be a word in parentheses or in brackets after each item on the agenda. You help people with some parameters on these are things that we really want to talk about, that we want input, that we want buy-in, and we can offer the room to discuss. And these are things that we just need to make a decision on today. We have discussed it before, ideally, or it's not too relevant. We can just make the decision, it's reversible. So by making that distinguishment between decide and discuss, you really invite in perspective, you generate buy-in, you give people a voice, you create a speak-up culture. And another tactic that you can use there is think, write, share. And what you often see, especially in organizations where there's a lot of hierarchy, there is not much speaking up in meetings. And when a senior person speaks, the others kind of thwart towards their arguments. So this is a phenomenon called groupthink in psychology. We value consensus over conflicts, and that is why we stay silent. A great way that you can deal with this, a growth mindset way, is to implement think, write, share. If you have a topic that you want people to discuss or that you want people to provide some perspective on, ask them to think about it for a minute or two. Ask them to write it down on a piece of paper. This is very important because once they have written it down, they cannot mentally, consciously or unconsciously kind of thwart their thinking according to the most senior person's arguments, and then share it. And ideally, you want the most senior person in the room to speak last. And by using that think, write, share protocol in meetings, you really give people a voice. You create that culture of speaking up. And by using all these three tactics in tandem with each other, meetings can become instantly a lot more efficient, a lot more effective, and also a lot more fun. People are bought in a lot more. And there's a question. Great tip, thank you. So the Hillary says that she will start implementing Think, Write, Share. That is great. Great to hear. It's really easy to implement. And so these are three techniques, right? They're very simple things that you can use every day, that you can prompt people to do. This is also why it's important to have that executive buy-in, because they can implement it from a top-down way and also from a everything to everything way, so that all the business units are experimenting with this and are reporting back. And you can use pulse surveys, for example, to have a little bit of view on what the metrics look like. Is this having an effect? How is this meeting rated? Are people feeling more heard? These are all things that you can measure. And of course, these are small changes, and you can also, when you go into the systems part, you can also start experimenting and implementing with bigger changes. Like, for example, I was talking about this approval process. You can actually revisit an entire approval process by removing layers, by switching the default, by making it so that after one layer of approval, an innovative project gets a green light by default, and that managers actually have to step in, speak up if they have anything to say about it, if they have if they want a proposal to be revisited, and otherwise an innovative project will just go through and will be operationalized. So these are more systemic implementations, systemic interventions, and they can help cultivate those habits and help those habits being embedded into the ways of working as well. If you want to get started with growth mindset, of course, there are many people that offer growth mindset programs. We do that as well. We also have a quick scan for if you want to have a low threshold way of starting to strategize about growth mindset, seeing which habits and systems we can start implementing. You can always reach out to us for that, and we're happy to help you. And what I always want to finish up with as well, what is interesting is that growth mindset is often a first step to many other transformations or many other agilities and adaptations that an organization can start making, because it instills this fundamental belief, and we go all the way back to the beginning, where an organization is not thinking about output only, but it's thinking about input, it's thinking about development and continuous learning, the belief that you can change, the belief that you cannot do this yet, but that you will learn over the coming days and weeks. And this fundamental belief is quite core to things like diversity and inclusion as well. To help people become more, create a diverse and inclusive way of working, inclusive context. It's key for digital transformation. If you look at the cases in the data, you often see that growth mindset often goes paired with a digital transformation, because it can catalyze digital transformation. Believing that we can change, believing that we want to embrace challenges, make mistakes, makes transformation a lot easier. Also for agile transformations, that is true. And innovation. So having this fundamental start of believing that you can improve with growth mindset also opens a gateway for organizational change and organizational change management and organizational agility, adaptation, resilience. So I often try to communicate it as just the start for an organization on their journey to become really people-centric, to become behaviorally informed. And it's a great start that will help you innovate and transform in any way possible, actually. So that being said, we went over quite a lot of info today. about growth mindset. And I have some room for questions now. So if you have them, please type them in the chat. I'm going to stop the recording as well. And then I'll give the virtual mic to you.